don't even know how to explain it to you. It's weird.
The silence and then the noise. The silence and then the noise.
It was like going so far into yourself that I couldn't get out.
A horror show that was not ever supposed to happen to me.
I felt like I was nothing. It doesn't get any lower than that.
Most people, at least once in their life, experience trauma. For many, it fades with time. But for others, it's relived over and over again, making them wonder if they will ever be able to get beyond trauma. A summer morning in London, Ontario, Canada. Uta Lawrence and Stan Fisher share a moment together.
The hibiscus is starting to come along. Too bad they only bloom for one day.
They know firsthand that everything can change in an instant. In 1999, on a morning much like this one, they prepared for a routine drive down Highway 401.
If you are driving anywhere this morning, be careful. Dense fog is covering the area.
Driving along the 401, there's patches of fog, and that makes me very nervous to start with. But then as we went along, here's this wall. It's a wall of fog. And as we entered it, Stan had to slam the brakes because there was already cars piled up. The 18-wheelers were just slamming right into us.
So there'd be pauses between the next group of trucks into the pileup, and you'd hear be dead silence, and then you'd hear the screech as they realized what was going on.
A van had slammed a little 14-year-old girl against my car. She's banging on the roof. Get me out of here. And then she screamed that she was on fire. The flames were twice as high as her. It was just horrendous.
87 vehicles were trapped in the wreckage. 8 people died, including a 14-year-old girl. One of the deadliest traffic accidents in Canadian history.
Are you driving?
Stan and Uta walked away from the accident physically unharmed. But the psychological fallout was overwhelming.
You obviously play all the things that happened to your head. Your nerves were just on edge.
Even simple noises triggered Stan. He experienced frequent flashbacks. Uta blocked out the memories by shutting down. She became isolated and withdrawn.
I tried so hard to be the person I used to be, but that person was nowhere to be found.
Both were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. 2 months after the accident, they enrolled in a study at Western University, led by Dr. Ruth Lanius.
Good to see you. Hi, Stan. Nice to see you.
Ruth was very interested in Stan and Uta. They'd experienced the same traumatic event, but their symptoms were radically different. Ruth had them recount the accident while undergoing brain scans. The results were remarkable.
Here's the scan we did, God, 16 years ago now.
Unbelievable.
Right? So the first scan is your scan, Stan. And what you can see here is activation in the front part of your brain, right here. And the front part of your brain is really involved with planning and thinking. So we think that lit up because you were reliving the accident and sort of planning how to get yourself and Uta out of the car.
Yeah.
If Stan's brain looked fired up, Uta's was nearly switched off.
So yours looks very different, right?
Indeed.
The only area we see brain activation here is in the back part of the brain. And the rest is really shut down.
I was the passenger,
Yeah.
okay? So I did not have the visual that Stan had. He could see.
You can still see the truck coming out across the back of the trunk lids.
So, and I had no idea what was going
happening.
on. Yeah.
You had those intense numbing experiences,
Yes.
feeling very detached from your emotions because I think they were
Yeah.
so intense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Stan and Uta taught us a lot about the effects of psychological trauma. Even though you can have been in the same accident in the same car, your symptoms can really be quite different. So there's a complexity of post-traumatic stress disorder that we really have to embrace.
How people respond to trauma is as unique as the individuals themselves. For some, one random event can result in PTSD. Others seem able to endure multiple incidents and soldier on. But with each trauma, even the most resilient weaken, often reaching a breaking point.
All right, so I'm gonna get you to sit right here.
I had no idea what PTSD was when I joined the military. Even if someone had to come up to me and said, hey, like, I know somebody that's post-traumatic stress disorder, I'd be like, what's that? You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have no clue.
Is it the same on the right or the left?
Right.
Exactly.
After 3 deployments with the Canadian military, things started to unravel for Steve O'Brien.
I'd have crazy nightmares or dreams. I never slept. I couldn't focus. I was irritable all the time. I changed as a soldier. I was a guy that led by example, and then I turned into a guy that was yelling and screaming all the time. I didn't want to listen to the kids, didn't want to listen to the wife, didn't want to listen to anything. I felt like I was nothing. You know, it doesn't get any lower than that. I knew I was going to be released from the military.
Faced with an uncertain future, Steve agreed to take part in a study led by doctors Margot Taylor and Ben Dunkley. They're trying to do what has never been done before: identify a biomarker for PTSD by tracking brain activity.
We certainly understand a lot about the neuroanatomy of the brain, but there's billions and billions and billions of neurons, right? And they're all talking to each other chemically and electrically. So the interactions among the brain regions and how this activity produces what we are and what we do is really not well understood at all.
To understand brain activity at such a micro level, they enlisted the hospital's MEG machine, one of only a few in Canada.
Most hospitals have MRI, which looks at blood flow in the brain. So it's very slow compared to the real neural activity in the brain. And MEG allows us to see where in the brain that activity is occurring in real time.
All right, so you show it that way.
The main part of the study compares soldiers with PTSD to other combat troops without any symptoms.
Just lay back. I'm gonna get you to put your head down first. And then I want you
In one test, soldiers are shown a series of photos, neutral images along with more evocative ones.
You start seeing those pictures, it brings back memories of what I actually seen and witnessed. So at one point, but I had tears in my eyes because some of the pictures I've actually seen in real life. The guys blowing up or the vehicles blowing up and stuff like that.
While Steve struggles to process the images, the researchers record and then analyze his responses.
We were stunned, actually, you know, that we really could see very clear differences in their brain responses, in their brain function.
Communication between the brain regions related to memory and emotion is much more active in soldiers with PTSD.
Okay, so you can go put your shoes on, you can put your belt on.
The soldiers with PTSD, the regions were talking to each other too much. We really think that one of the problems is that these traumatic events increase connectivity, and then in soldiers with PTSD, that never returns to stable communication.
Finally getting to see his once invisible injury offers some relief to Steve. But back home in Ormocto, New Brunswick, it's harder to ignore the pain. Steve lives near one of Canada's largest military bases, a place full of reminders of his soldiering past.
Everyone looks at me all the time. They're like, oh my God, you're retired, you're so young. I'm like, yeah, like, thanks for reminding me, you know? Yeah, I look young, okay, but I'm still injured. You know, I'm still hurt.
Making the transition to civilian life was a struggle.
This is where I did all my correspondence, right in here. 8 hours a day after being a soldier for 20-some years, you know, being hardcore all the time, and then come in here, you know, dealing with PTSD and severe injuries, and then have to sit here all day and do this, right? I felt like the whole house was coming in on me.
The event that pushed Steve over the edge occurred not overseas, but during a training mission in the high Arctic. In 2011, a charter plane crashed, and Steve was left to deal with the bodies.
And there's where all the problems started, right there, in Resolute Bay. We're getting ready to do a downed aircraft scenario, and then the real plane came in and crashed. The front of the plane landed almost right behind our sea cans, and the back of the plane stood like maybe like 100 feet back. And then all the cargo and the people were spread all over the place, and then from there it was chaos. I found like the little girl there dead on the island, right, for 3 or 4 days laying there. And then the gray foxes were ripping the bodies apart and bringing them up. It never goes away, right? The nightmares, the waking up in the cold sweats. The main one was going around searching for people and finding the little girl, and when I turn around, it's Morgan, my youngest daughter. I wouldn't go back to sleep after that, no way. The way I released from that was just to get in my truck, and I would drive and drive and drive. There was many times driving, all I can think of is pull the truck over to the side of the road and kill myself. But I love my kids too much, right? And I can't have them growing up without me, so it's not worth it in the end. All right, Morgan. Have a good day.
You too.
Show later.
Okay.
Okay.
See ya.
Boston, Massachusetts, one of the research capitals of the world. Here they're considering a new treatment for PTSD, deep brain stimulation.
Good. So that'll be our starting point.
The principle is a simple one. The brain is an electrical organ, and by regulating that electricity, disorders can be corrected.
Great. Why don't you go get started? I'm just going to take another look here.
The procedure has never been tried before for PTSD, but Dr. Ahmad Eskandar has had great success using it to treat Parkinson's.
I can't think how many thousands of times I've done this. So what do you want me to call you during the surgery? So I'm going to talk to you a lot. Sue? Okay.
Electrodes are guided to spots in the brain where abnormal electrical signals have been detected.
Andy, can you turn that knob up there clockwise?
Electrical stimulation is carefully tuned until symptoms subside.
Sue, can you move, like open and close your head for me? Good. Show me how you'd screw in a light bulb. Nice.
Big and fast.
Yeah, good.
Tell me how that feels. Feels wonderful, she said.
Great, perfect. Okay, that's exactly what we want.
The electrodes will remain implanted in the patient's brain, providing ongoing relief. The success with Parkinson's prompted the U.S. military to fund Transform DBS, a project aimed at using deep brain stimulation to treat PTSD. But even with virtually unlimited resources, this is proving much harder than anticipated.
This isn't like a stroke or like a Parkinson's disease where you can do an MRI scan and see a spot on the brain that looks totally abnormal and say, yeah, right there, that's your problem, that's your brain tumor, that's where you had your bleed, we're just gonna cut that out, get rid of it, you'll be better. These are disorders that are of information. Your brain is anatomically normal, but it's not communicating in the right way.
The relative complexity of PTSD requires a much more elaborate stimulation device, one that still needs to fit under a patient's scalp.
Every part of the project is tough. I mean, that's the problem with implants. It's how do you shrink it down?
So the degree of miniaturization that you've got here is over 100-fold shrinking, and that's really been an amazing technical feat.
But even with a small enough device, figuring out how it needs to work for each individual is an ongoing struggle.
The challenge is there's not one single thing that is PTSD. There's, first off, the trauma types are as diverse as the whole range of human experiences, but then people express their PTSD in different ways. So what we believe we're going to have to do is deeply assess each individual patient. There's still a couple years of basic neuroscience before I can really say, I think you should get this thing and leave the hospital with it.
Elsewhere, though, help is required immediately.
Multiple attacks have erupted in Paris tonight.
It was as carefully coordinated as it was murderous.
The deadliest attacks in France in decades.
On November 13th, 2015, a series of terror attacks in Paris left 130 dead and a nation reeling. Max Guillet was living just across the street from the Bonbière Café when he heard shots.
Ici, là où il y a les gens qui sont là, qui sont assis à l'angle de la rue, là, il y avait 4-5 personnes qui étaient, ils étaient décédés, ils étaient morts. Il y avait une dame qui était entre la vie et la mort.
Son visage me restera figé dans ma tête. Ses yeux qui s'ouvraient, qui fermaient. C'était lentement, c'était ouvert, et puis après, elle s'est arrêtée de vivre.
Oh, c'est pas vrai, oh les pauvres. Oh, c'est pas vrai. Oh, c'est pas vrai.
When Max arrived, he documented the carnage.
Ils mouraient l'un à côté de l'autre, sachant qu'il y avait un monsieur qui était à côté de moi aussi. Il y avait le crâne arraché, ou que son sang partait comme de la lave. C'est des choses que je n'ai jamais vues.
Following the attack, Max developed PTSD.
Vous faites des cauchemars, que ce soit la nuit, mais vous faites aussi des cauchemars le jour, tout en sachant que vous êtes vraiment éveillé. Vous avez les yeux ouverts et vous parlez avec des gens, mais vous n'êtes pas là réellement. Toute cette sensation, toute cette odeur, toutes ces couleurs, je pensais que ça n'allait pas partir. Je commençais vraiment à sombrer. Dans ma mémoire, je sombrais un peu, je sombrais. C'était invivable. C'était invivable.
Dr. Alain Brunet of Montreal had developed a new treatment for PTSD. He was eager to share it with the many sufferers in Paris.
I said to my colleagues, I've got all the results here. such a thing that this thing works. We need to do something because the treatment facilities will be totally overwhelmed. So Paris represents an opportunity to take this treatment that I've been working on for the last decade out of the lab and into the real world.
Alain's treatment could help large numbers of people quickly and easily. He claims that after just 6 sessions, with the aid of a readily available drug, PTSD can be cured.
The treatment is amazingly simple. It consists in taking propranolol, which is a beta blocker, and you need to recall your traumatic memory, your traumatic event, under the influence of the beta blocker. And this medication will block in part the emotional component of the memory. We are taking the emotional component of the memory and we're decreasing its strength. So we're transforming a traumatic memory into a regular bad memory.
Desperate to relieve his PTSD symptoms, Max agreed to undergo the beta blocker treatment.
Max. Docteur, bonjour.
Salut.
Bonjour, docteur.
Ça va?
Oui, très bien.
We want people to recall the most horrific part of the scene. We want them to recall the part that they just cannot process, that they cannot digest. So in order to do that, we have them write down an account of their traumatic event. And then I ask them to read it to me so as to make sure that I reawaken that memory sufficiently for the medication to exert its effect.
Je lui donne la main, je lui dis comme ça, écoutez madame, vous avez encore la vie, vous êtes là, ne vous en faites pas madame. La police, l'ambulance vont arriver, la vie n'est pas finie pour vous madame.
Parfait. Every week they come back and they read their trauma script. They feel a little less emotional about it. And after 3 or 4 weeks, they can really tell the difference. And for most people, 6 sessions is enough to really feel detached from this horrific event.
Les comptes rendus pour la première fois, c'était très difficile. Parce que vous avez tout en tête. Et le deuxième jour, il y a eu une apparition vraiment, on peut dire, magique. Parce que j'ai pu discuter ça au détail près, sans avoir à ne verser qu'une seule larme. Maintenant, je peux le dire sans être en crise, sans être en pleurs ou en nage. Je voyais plus ce film qui était là, qui me bloquait mon espace dans ma tête. Et si jamais je ne me suis pas soigné, je pense que jusqu'à l'heure que je vous parle, je serais encore dans une situation que je serais vraiment encore en bas de terre.
The treatment worked for Max, but Alain admits it's not for everyone.
We are still challenged with people whose trauma occurred when they were young, especially if the trauma was repeated. And I doubt that a therapy like this would be sufficient for someone who has experienced a constellation of traumatic events.
How people deal with complex trauma is a question that has consumed Dr. Bessel van der Kolk for more than 30 years. Today, Bessel runs his own trauma center near Boston and is a world authority on PTSD. His fascination with the disorder began back in the 1970s when he first met Vietnam vets at a local hospital.
I walk into the clinic and the halls of the clinic are pockmarked by holes made by fists. These guys are continuously blowing up. They were totally living in the war. They hadn't come home. And their bodies were on constant alert for danger. And then as the night wears on, they start having images about what happened back then. They had terrifying feelings. And then they usually drank themselves to sleep. once you're traumatized, you see the world differently, you live in a different world, and your perceptions and the way you perceive the world is different, and everybody else is an alien.
Bessel and others wrestled with their colleagues to have war-related trauma accepted as a unique psychiatric condition.
Naming is very important. If you call something an explosive sociopathic disorder, it's very different from if you call it post-traumatic stress disorder. That means these guys, they're still very difficult people to deal with, but now you start beginning to get a handle on where it comes from and the beginning of maybe beginning to treat it.
In 1980, just after the Vietnam War, PTSD finally became an official psychiatric diagnosis. But many outside the military also developed the disorder. Women twice as often as men. Lorraine McKeon is one of those women. For years, she worked almost non-stop. Long hours, a way to avoid dealing with the past. Lorraine had never told anyone about the event that changed her life.
When I was 16, I was raped. It was someone that I trusted, that I thought I was friends with. There are many things I remember, like the feeling of the carpet, what it felt like to have someone push down on you and having them say, like, I love you, don't tell anyone. You keep reliving it and keep reinforcing feelings of you're worthless, you're nothing. No wonder you were raped. And that would just like spiral down. I was afraid, to trust my instincts. I was afraid to go out into the world. The punishing effects of PTSD made me feel like I was crazy.
With every flashback, Lorraine re-experienced the rape. Each time, her sense of helplessness was reinforced.
People who shut down because they feel they're completely helpless, that, whatever they do will still result in them being hurt, and have this complete loss of agency during the trauma, clinically usually are much sicker than individuals who haven't experienced that.
My view of myself just completely changed. I just wanted someone to love me, even if it didn't really look like a healthy love or, it was an abusive love. That's what I kept going back to. In that mind space, of course it's going to happen again. You have no barriers up, you have no self-protection up, you have no, concept of what is good and bad. And in fact, every bad thing just reinforces how you've come to view yourself.
Lorraine was assaulted twice more, each time by someone she knew.
The more repeated the trauma, the more difficult the disorder is to treat. And we like to work with one trauma. We like to diagnose people based on that one trauma, but often things are not as simple. It's absolutely critical to be aware of that.
Repeated exposure to trauma is a near constant in some places.
In the city of Chicago, murder rates are high and continue to climb.
Once again, Chicago is in the spotlight over gun violence.
Over 3 days, 68 people were shot.
We talk about a gang culture that starts almost at birth. By the time they're 12, their destiny is set, and it's either prison or death.
Chicago is the third largest city in the U.S. and the murder capital of America.
Within a couple of weeks, there were 2 3-year-olds, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old shot. It's just so completely insane what's happening here.
For more than 20 years, Dr. Brad Stolbach has worked with youth traumatized by violence.
Raise your hand if you live in a community where there's violence on a relatively frequent basis. Raise your hand if you know someone who's been injured by the violence going on in your community, been shot, stabbed. Raise your hand if you know someone or have a member of your family who's been killed by the violence going on in your community. Levels of loss that most of them have endured are just mind-boggling. To have so many people killed at a young age, and the younger you are, the more that experience shapes who you are.
Many of the youth Brad encounters live in a virtual war zone. In this environment, they often develop PTSD symptoms.
You can't pinpoint a specific time when the trauma occurred because there are so many toxins in their lives. The injuries that they have may be very similar to those that people experience in war, and the people involved seem to be younger and younger.
Brad partners with people who grew up here on the front lines. People like Kosi Barber.
When I was around like 9 to 10, it was like crazy. We'll be fighting with the kids from down the streets. At first it'd be fists, then we'll start having like bats and poles, and a couple people then went to the hospital. Like I even got put in the hospital before. I got hit in my face with a pole, and like my lip was kind of ripped open, blood gushing everywhere. I don't know, it just escalated. And once it took a step further, then it's like a point of no return. But you just got to keep going, and like whatever struggle you got to always overcome it.
Along with Kosi and others, Brad started a program for survivors of violence. Project Fire offers youth who have been shot a chance to learn glass blowing. It's dangerous, but not deadly. A welcome change for kids like Lati, shot at 15.
I wouldn't move out of Chicago. This ain't no place to be. You can't walk around with your friends no more. You can't do nothing you want to do no more. You gotta keep your head up all the time. You gotta worry about getting shot or killed. It ain't right.
If they're constantly just in survival mode, always aware that there's danger around them, then those parts of the brain that are involved in making sense of things and learning things, and those parts get shut down.
Roberto was also shot at 15, has classic PTSD symptoms.
When I got shot, it just made me more paranoid. Just like people from the war, like a firework gonna make them paranoid. Like a car rolling up on the corner, that's gonna make me paranoid, you know? A car pulling up to me, that's gonna make me paranoid. You know, if people just looking at me, that's gonna make me think that they gonna do something to me.
A lot of people, when they've been shot, will have reactions in their body as if they're back there at the time that they got shot. That can be their heart racing, it can be having a flashback, it could be all of a sudden feeling like they need to fight or feeling very, very angry. And a lot of times when they have those kinds of feelings, they feel like they're going crazy. And so one of the first things we talk with them about is the fact that, no, that's not crazy at all, it's perfectly normal.
Let's let that cool down and we'll gather again. That's perfect. Great teamwork, you guys. You're working with very hot materials. The environment's very intense. You can burn yourself, cut yourself at any moment. So it's inherently dangerous.
It's very hard to be working with glass and not be in the present moment. It's very hard to be doing that work and not become mindful. And that's the way to help people who've been traumatized.
Okay, Lati, blow, por favor. Like nothing ever happened.
Many of them have been robbed of the ability to be in the present at all. They're thinking about the past and the immediate future that's a few seconds away.
It's okay. It's all right. Now you know what to do and what not to do.
Glass blowing is a low-tech solution compared to brain scans and implants. But Brad is unapologetic.
Scientific breakthroughs are great if they lead to something. But what is a kid that I'm working with who's paralyzed from the waist down, what does he care what's going on in his brain since he got shot? We have to, as a society, make a commitment to deal with this and to fix it. We need to decide, do we want to be in a society where everybody is fully human or not?
The trauma affecting marginalized communities is starkly visible. In more tranquil places, it's less obvious, but can be just as destructive. In an affluent part of Boston, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk works with survivors of childhood trauma. The problem is so widespread, he calls it a hidden epidemic.
Trauma is not just an inner city issue. You see people grow up under very fortunate circumstances where there was a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse and sexual abuse. It happens there too, but nobody talks about it. If your experience is that when I come home, I'm going to get hit, I'm going to see terrible things, I need to protect my mom from getting hit, you get a brain that's wired differently. If you have nothing but deprivation and abuse as a kid, you look post-traumatic. You may have flashbacks sometimes, you may become hyper-aroused, you may be numbed out. That follows you when you grow up. This other part of you keeps coming back and keeps coming out. And so when something bad happens to you as an adult, you're much more likely to get a full-blown PTSD than if you have grown up under safe circumstances.
Whenever they first experience trauma, people with PTSD must find a way to regain control of their lives.
Morning, Morgan. Welcome to Friday.
Steve O'Brien was diagnosed with PTSD and released from the Canadian military a year ago.
I felt depressed, I felt sad, I felt angry. I felt like I'm letting my family down because I'm not that strong the guy I was when I joined the military. Now I'm just, broken down and sad all the time, and that causes a lot of problems with people because they don't understand it, including my own family. Like, it took a long time for them to clue into what was actually going on with me, right?
Breakfast of champions, guys.
My daughter, we just recently went through her being diagnosed with pre-PTSD because she's so close to me.
I find, if I'm with him and I notice that he's anxious, I kind of get anxious too, and, I can tell when, he's having one of those days, and I find, I kind of have one of those days too. I kind of just feel, nervous for nothing, and I don't know, I kind of tell when he's not the happiest. Sometimes it's frustrating because it's you don't understand, so you can't help them, but you want to. So yeah, it does affect all of us.
While his family learns to live with the disorder, Steve looks for relief elsewhere. He often meets up with other vets suffering from PTSD. Today, a former commander tries to boost morale.
Whether you got it in Afghanistan or Somalia, Bosnia, Cyprus, it doesn't matter. You guys characterize what it means to be a warrior. You're a fighter. And I'm proud that you guys are together to help so many people.
You're scared to death to say that there's something wrong with you. People just won't come out and say anything. We want to get them out of the house, and the only way to get them out of the house is to offer them things. Offer them food, offer them, a hug, or just different things, so they're not sitting in their basement thinking of killing themselves.
Steve volunteers at this place, where vets can get marijuana for their PTSD. The treatment may be controversial to some, but it's legal and seems to work for many of the people here.
You want to give me a lesson?
I can give you a quick lesson if you want it right now. Okay, it's your product in there. You got it all grinded up.
But this isn't just a place to get high. It's somewhere to hang out, share experiences, and rebuild lives.
I purposely got an apartment across the street here. I was just coming out of rehab for PTSD and addiction treatment, and I knew that I needed this as support. And when you're feeling down and you're out, it's too easy to just lay on the couch or the bed. But if it's this close, we're talking 20 meters, I force myself to come hang out here and not by myself.
You can just grab a hug and say, you know what? Today's a good day. Oh, it's not a good day. Okay. Well, what's wrong? And then you get people just tackle you, right? They won't let you have a bad day. So
it's priceless, you know, because you can just talk it out. And when I go home, I feel a bit better. There's a little bit more motivation, and you know.
We're trained not to do that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so hard, right?
Absolutely.
It is. 20-some years of being told to be a hard ass, and then all of a sudden you're telling you not to cry. You're like, what do you mean don't cry? I haven't cried in 20 years. Leave me alone. You know what I mean? I'm allowed to cry. Yeah, exactly.
Should be as natural as a smile at this point. Yeah, exactly.
Up until that point, I just dealt with everything the way I always dealt with it, you know, put my head down and just carry on, right? But now I took my head out the sand, and I'm somewhat looking that way now.
For over 15 years, Lorraine McKeon hid her traumatic past. She told no one she'd been sexually assaulted. But the secret became too much to bear.
I realized that a lot of anxiety and these huge panic attacks wasn't necessarily the after effects of having been raped or assaulted. It was because I had this big secret, and keeping that secret had such a stranglehold on me.
Lorraine finally decided to write about her trauma.
That's a tough thing to do with something that you've spent like half of your life trying to avoid.
She was comforted by her family's reaction.
We had this really freeing conversation. Both my mom and my grandmother kind of said the same thing to me. It's like, did you think that we didn't grow up experiencing the same things? And like, I really did. Like, I really thought that I was the only one carrying this story, because that's, you know, the narrative I had built for myself. And that's been like one of the most healing things. To know that that's common has really diminished the power of the shame.
In 1999, Stan Fisher and Uta Lawrence survived one of the deadliest car accidents in Canadian history.
That's where we are right there. That little pile of ashes is us. The mangled mess that you shouldn't have come out of.
The ripple effects of their trauma remain, even many years later.
You're never going to be who you were before, and the trauma is never going to go away. Even looking at those pictures is still going to bring back certain memories.
But with time, most of their PTSD symptoms have drifted away.
Each and every person who has experienced a traumatic event that affects them to the point where they have PTSD need time to heal. I compare this to having a gash on your face. It needs care, and the better care you give the healing process, the smaller the scar that remains. The last couple of years, I have been more fun, more ready to do things, but that scar will never go away.